Well, the Drug Foundation is calling for a more health-based, holistic approach to tackling New Zealand's methamphetamine problem. It says the government spends 4 times as much on ineffective drug law enforcement than it spends on measures that actually prevent drug harm. The Drug Foundation thinks more investment in community programs will reduce the demand for meth in the first place by providing health and social support. Well, for more on this, I'm joined in the studio now by Green MP Chloe Swarbrick, who has spoken at length about the need to reform our drug laws. Thanks for coming in, Chloe. You've talked about how we are losing the war on drugs. Why shouldn't we be spending big money then on enforcement?
Well, the question is one of efficacy. Are we actually trying to achieve something here, or are we trying to look like we are achieving something here? Because we know that the settings that we've had both in policy and the spending that we have had as well on the likes of enforcement for the past 40 and 50 years has not got rid of drugs. In fact, it's meant that we've seen more drugs, more drug harm, more people locked up in prison, more families torn apart, and ultimately more community harm. So something has to be done differently.
So if we took the money we're spending on enforcement and put it into rehab, into treatment services, what would the impact of that be? What are the proven impacts of that?
Well, we actually have a really brilliant local case study of that called Te Oranga up in Northland. Interestingly enough, was something instigated by the former national government back in 2017. It's a collaboration between the Northland DHB and police, which shows that for every $1 spent, you're getting a return of $3 to $7. There's a 34% reduction in drug harm-related crime and offending. And it ultimately actually is about trying to reduce the demand for methamphetamine within that community and not just punishing people, which we know instigates and continues that cycle.
But the government, as you'll know as well, is getting a real hammering about being too soft on crime. I mean, they're going to have to go hard on enforcement, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, and that comes down to a question of whether we want evidence in our politics. What does that actually mean? Because when people say things like soft on crime, soft on drugs, or whatever else, the fact of the matter is that we have spent good money after bad for 40 plus years now on the approach that we are currently taking, and it has made things worse. Do we want evidence, and do we want to act like grown-ups in our parliament? Well, the evidence is clear. We have to change.
But what about like organised crime, which of course makes a lot of its money out of this? Aren't we letting them off the hook?
Absolutely not. And in fact, if you want to talk about the ways that we can best tackle organised crime when it comes to substances, then we have to look across at countries like Portugal, which, 20-odd years ago took a very radically different approach and has showcased exactly what it looks like to reduce drug harm in terms of overdoses, in terms of people spending time in prison cells, in terms of all of the proliferation of more and more harmful substances, but also taking power away from those organised crime groups.
What about taking power, though, and funding away from the police? I mean, don't they desperately need as much funding as they can get at the moment?
Again, this comes down to who do you want at the front lines actually dealing with this problem. The police themselves are the first to say that when they turn up, the crime has already been committed. Do we want to prevent this stuff? If we do, the evidence is clear. Programs like Te Oranga, which will reduce demand for methamphetamine in communities by getting alongside people who are experiencing these problems, is the best way to stop this happening in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff. Chloe, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.